Welcome to the Biotech Startups podcast by Exceeder. Join us as we speak with first-time founders, experienced scientists, serial entrepreneurs, and biotech investors about the challenges and triumphs of running a biotech startup. Gain actionable insight into navigating the life sciences industry in each episode as we explore the business of science from pre-seed to IPO with your host, John Chi. The purpose of the Biotech Startups podcast is to provide general insight into the ever-changing world of life sciences through the experience of a variety of guests. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked from this podcast are at the user's own risk. The views expressed by guests and any employee of Exceeder on the podcast are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of Exceeder or content sponsors. Any appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement or recommendation of any product, service, or entity referenced in the podcast by Exceeder or by its guests. In our last episode, we spoke with Maneesh Jain about his experiences founding multiple startups, executing Ion Torrent's go-to-market strategy, and how simple blood draws paved the way for his current endeavours. If you missed it, be sure to go back and give part 2 a listen. In part 3, we chat with Maneesh about what led to the founding of Mirvie, the importance of empathy in company culture, his thoughts on the maternal health crisis, and fundraising strategies in difficult times.
And so, we're now kind of getting to the current day. And after the acquisition by GRAIL, what was the driving force behind founding Mirvie?
Yeah. So I spent some time at GRAIL, and I think that was good, but I think they were starting to have their own discussions with Illumina and kind of expanding, and it was a pretty big company. So I think it's, again, always thinking about where is the biggest unmet need. And so what happened is I kept in touch with Steve Quake over the years, and
Cool.
done some exciting stuff, of course, with the non-invasive prenatal test in the US and helped commercialize that. But he also had a takeaway. So his older daughter, Zoe, I think he's been quite public about this, was born several weeks preterm. And so this kind of very personal experience with a pregnancy that had gone, that was perfectly normal. And then suddenly, several weeks before they're due, they're rushing to the ER because now the premature birth is happening. And this, we realized, just happens all too frequently. I remember with my older, we were expecting a kind of routine induction, and then it was just like 36 hours later, and then it's emergency C-section, all kinds of stuff is happening. And what we took away from these journeys, which most parents have and moms have, is that it's kind of a black box. And we know so little about something that matters so much. I think that's just been a shared experience. And I think people don't always talk about it maybe as much as some other areas of healthcare, but it's pretty clear that the impact is huge. 1 in 5 pregnancies and families are impacted by complications. We know very little. And yet, if you could detect these conditions really early, then you can take preventive action. And everybody's highly incentivized to take that preventive action because everybody is looking, whether it's the physician or the mom or the family, everybody wants a healthy mom and baby.
Yeah.
So I think the opportunity to have a window into what's going to happen in the future and try to take preventive action is pretty compelling. So I think when we looked at it, we kind of said, okay, we could do another cancer company, right? We'll certainly get well-funded, and there's a lot of technologies, but there's at least 100 other companies, maybe several hundred other companies that are doing that. So why not work in an area which we know has a really large unmet need? People really care about it, and very few are actually doing something on that. Also, the lessons we had from early cancer detection. So one thing we learned at Cirina was we could detect these tumors that were a few millimeters. And in fact, they were so small that by imaging, it looked clean. You couldn't see them sometimes. And so there were actually false positives for your test. But when you did follow up 2 years later, the person ended up developing cancer. And so you actually had a true positive. It's just that imaging could not confirm it at that stage. So I think that gave us some confidence that, hey, if you can detect tumors that are so small and you can see that in circulation in the blood, then certainly big organs like the placenta, the uterus, the cervix, which are involved in the whole process in pregnancy, you should see signal from those. And that was kind of the hypothesis. So Steve Quake published a paper in Science, which showed that hey, in fact, we can, under some conditions, detect preterm birth like a couple of weeks, actually a couple of months, I think, in advance in that paper, but it had longitudinal sampling. And so we took a leap of faith and said, hey, if this works, we might be able to develop this RNA platform to look at the underlying biology of pregnancy and kind of really show, is it in a course for normal development or abnormal development? And that was really the genesis for getting the company going, is the idea that while cell-free DNA has been so productive in cancer, cell-free RNA, which is much more tied to development, right? The baby and mom's development is mediated by RNA. That would provide us vital insights into how things are developing and give us the signals on, is it a normal course or an abnormal course of development?
So Maneesh, as you mentioned, there's tons of ventures out there that are cancer diagnostics focused companies. Why, with pregnancy being so important to humanity, why isn't there more pregnancy complication diagnostic companies out there? And why is it such an unmet medical need? And frankly, what is the state of the market?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And we've thought about this a lot. So I think it has to do with some systemic reasons. It has to do with awareness and probably also technology. So let me just touch on those three areas. I think systemically, there's just been fewer women, I think, in leadership roles, whether it's Congress, I think it's 20% of Congress, 25%, venture funded female check writers, and that's probably in the single digits, and other areas. So I think there's been less investment in this area historically, because it's been perceived as it's a women's health thing, and there haven't been as many people pushing it. But I think that's one area we're trying to change, where we actually think, like you say, it's one of the most important things for families. So we think it's actually a family health question, not just a women's health question, and everybody should pay attention because it's so important. We think about it as foundational to
another understatement. I think that having children is important for humanity to exist.
Slightly.
Slightly, just a little bit.
And then I think what's understood now, then let's talk about awareness. I think the second leg here, right? I think often it's been thought of as something that just happens during pregnancy. So there's two areas where that's incorrect. One is that we have realized that in the last 10 years of research, that what happens in pregnancy has lifetime impact. So moms who have hypertensive disorders in pregnancy have a 2 to 4 higher risk of heart disease throughout their lifetime, and even in the early years after pregnancy. And so there's actually now cardiologists are starting to, as part of their assessment of heart disease, they ask you, have you had preeclampsia in a previous pregnancy or hypertensive disorder? So that's starting to emerge. It wasn't really clear. And then the second thing is, it's just for many societal reasons, I think, have not as much talked about. And so when you ask somebody, you get all these conversations, but otherwise people don't talk about if they went through a complication that's kind of under the radar, and maybe they talk to those as friends, but it's not been something that has had high awareness. I don't know if there's stigma associated or what, but I think those are the things we need to change. And I think that's increasingly changing. So I think women in leadership roles is changing. Awareness, I think we now start to see the media actually talking about the maternal health crisis. Just simple things. Today, pregnancy is more dangerous for moms than it was for their mothers. I think just think of that. How can that be in the most advanced country on earth, where we are doing worse than the previous generation when it comes to this issue? It's just staggering, right? And then the last area is, I think, also technology. If you are only able to recognize symptoms, then it's pretty tough. But if you can do something safe, and that's, of course, really important in pregnancy, nobody wants to take risks. But if you can do something as safe as taking a blood sample and tap into the biology through that and understand where you are on the course of development, is it normal or is it on course for disease? That's a game changer. And that really, we haven't been able to do that till the last few years, because we really needed to be able to look at the whole genome very scalably, in our case, the whole transcriptome. And you also needed these machine learning tools and data science to evolve, where we can find patterns reliably in these very large data sets. Because if you're looking at thousands of patients, and for each of them, you're looking at tens of thousands of genomic data points, pretty quickly approaching 100 million plus data points. And so to make sense of all that, you need advancements in data science. So I think those two technologies have also come to a place. So I think we understand the historic reasons why this field has been left behind. But I think now the awareness is increasing. The technology is certainly there. And I think I don't know. Fundamentally, it's really not something we can ignore any longer.
Yeah, because I'm just like it sounds like a no-brainer. Like hearing this, like as it is. I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to understand how important this is, to be quite honest. And I'm glad you guys are doing the work that you guys do. And on the Mirvie front, the technology that you're developing and the team that you're building, can you tell me a little bit about kind of your approach to company building? And obviously you've built up a wealth of experience, as we've kind of covered thus far. But what is your approach as the leader of Mirvie?
Yeah, definitely a few lessons learned, I think, from past companies, which I'm bringing to bear here, and actually several of the leadership team too, who has got a lot of have a lot of combined startup experience. One is, I think it's really important to build a collaborative and supportive environment. So people should feel that they can come in and do their best work here, and that if mistakes happen because they're taking risks, then we acknowledge it, figure out how to not do it next time, and move on, not blaming people. So I think that's part and parcel of taking risks and moving fast. So I think that sort of fundamental collaborative and supportive environment is pretty key. Now, alongside that, we need to have pretty aggressive goals. And so I think otherwise you end up getting really not a cutting edge environment. You end up getting a software environment. So sort of balancing the collaborative and supportive pieces as a base, but then putting some pretty ambitious goals on top of that, and be really kind of stick to hitting those goals and milestones and do everything possible to hit those. The other thing is just empathy. That's one of our core values at the company. And so our core values are also innovation and rigor and speed, and you'll see those more often. But empathy is really central to what we do. Obviously, it's empathy for the families and moms who are going through this process, most important process in their lives, and a very important outcome with childbirth. But also empathy for each other in terms of knowing what each function needs to do for it to all come together and successfully. And when you're doing large clinical studies, right, it's even more, the early companies I talked about, life science is complex because it has, aspects of devices and computation and molecular biology and chemistry and all that disciplines. Data science has to come together. Now you're layering on the whole large clinical trials, clinical operations, PIs, clinicians. And so there's all of this complexity, regulatory, there's so much complexity that goes into this. So I think just empathy really means for us, make sure we understand the challenges that other groups are up against and how they're solving those. So that, again, we have perspective, right? Each of us is doing amazing stuff in our area, but perspective that it all needs to come together, and it'll only come together as well as each individual piece. So
absolutely. And I was thinking about, empathy is also a core part of Exceeder's philosophy and ethos as well. And, exactly what you said, it goes to having empathy for, for us, it was like, our vendors, our team, our shareholders, everyone in the ecosystem it takes a village, really. And I know, and it may sound cliche, but it really does take a village. And sometimes business, at least, can kind of sometimes on the internet can distill business to just, it's just business, and it's not personal, and it's a number in a spreadsheet. But and maybe this is me just waxing philosophic about my business philosophy, but I think business for me is very, very personal, and it really requires empathy for whoever you're working with. And because honestly, like nothing important gets done by yourself. It all gets done as a team, and in the broader team as well. So as I know you're kind of like in this motion where we've set these aggressive goals. And by the way, we do the same thing here at Exceeder. We set an aggressive goal, and I think it just sharpens everybody. Like everybody comes together and rallies towards that North Star. And I know when you have big, ambitious goals, and we're talking about big clinical trials, which are, intense. How has your, in addition to operating the company, how has your fundraising experience been? I know 2022 and 2023 have been difficult for the broader life sciences. And you've clearly done, you've worked miracles in 2000, you've worked miracles in 2008. Kind of, is there any kind of, advice for those who may not have lived through those experiences when it comes to fundraising and capitalizing a company that requires a ton of capital, especially when we're planning to go into clinic?
Yeah. Couple of answers to that. I think one is just to build on something I think that you've shared about is focus, right? Like for you guys, you're doing liquid handling, you're not doing, I think you said building planes or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it.
I think that comes into even sharper focus in this kind of environment, right? You really have to distill it to the essentials that you need to be successful. So I think like really a hyper focus on kind of saying, what are the essential things we need to do right now to get to the next milestone? So I think generally, I've carried that philosophy through most of the company building over the years. But I think in environments like today and 2008, and 2001, it's just much more of a sharper focus in terms of what allows you to get to the next milestone. So if you think of it controllable and uncontrollable, what we can control is hitting our milestones. Can you control how well the market's going to do and how big checks investors are going to write when? Not really. You can try to persuade them, but you can't really control those macro forces. But what you can control is hitting those milestones. And I think the more value you create by hitting those milestones will eventually get recognized. Now, if somebody's trying to raise money in the next 6 months, it's tough. There's going to be no easy ways. And if that's the position you're in, then I think you just have to make sure you partner with investors who they'll get a pound of flesh, but hopefully they're very good partners for the longer term, right? And can take you through and share your longer term vision. So the very short term advice would be is if you're having to raise money, it's not going to be in great terms. That's a given right now. But I think still there's the opportunity to find investors who share a longer term vision so that when things do turn around and get better, then they're even more solidly behind you, right? But the other answer is then other side of it is if you can wait a little bit, like if you have at least a year of runway, think about how you can extend that a little bit and what are the really key milestones that are valued by investors. Because there are many things that are very nice to do, but you really have to get to the must-do list. It's very easy to say and actually very hard to do because everything feels like it's a must-do. But if you keep asking, is it really a must-do and why is it a must-do? Keep asking the why question till eventually you say, no, this is absolutely essential. Or, you know what? I could actually push that out. That's not absolutely essential. So that's another piece of the discipline. I think just try to hit the milestones and extend your runway wherever possible by just prioritizing super highly. And it's not a fun process, I think, but that's sort of, like you say, it's along with the collaborative aspect and the empathy, which are really foundational to building great teams. You have to have a sharpness too with startups, right? And so this process is about sharpness, is where are you going to cut the line for projects? And there will be a line, and it has to be really crystal clear. In fact, articulating what you're not doing may be more important than what you are doing, even, right, in times like this, because you have to not do some things and focus on other things. So yeah, I think those are kind of the two pieces of advice, very short term, try to find the right type of partner in investors. And then hopefully, I think by sometime next year, mid next year, things should be better. And eventually they'll get to, I think, a more normal place. It's a lot of capital in the market. There's a lot of innovation. And I think those things are still happening. I think the deploying of capital and the valuations are, in a tough place right now, and probably not recovering in the next 6 months at least. So I think just being as judicious as possible.
Yeah, and when I kind of zoom out, exactly what you're saying is so critical. And the science, the science is incredibly compelling. Exactly what you said. The innovation is happening. It's not like, when the volatility of the markets, it's not the science that's problematic. If the science was problematic, we're in trouble. We are in trouble. But when the market goes up and down, I try to remind the team that it's like, look, it's going to be what it is. It's a roller coaster, but on the grand scheme of things, the innovation is taking place, and we want to be where the innovation is. So I completely agree with you there. And I think exactly what you said about focus is so important, because if you just work backwards, that Charlie Munger's invert it, that his saying, it's okay, well, how many hours are there in a work week? And then from there back into, okay, what can I actually do during this work week that is of import? And then just try to actually be so critical, do a self audit of what you as an individual is doing and as a team are doing. And is this pushing the ball forward to hit this goal, to reach the North Star? And it's painful. Like we did this exercise like last year, and honestly, they're like, you get so invested in the project, it almost feels like personal. You're like letting something go, and something almost just like a part of you, just like a void almost. But as we reflect on kind of the decisions we made to kind of pare things back, no regrets at all. Everyone has like come together. It's like, this was the right move. And it's, we're now, instead of rowing like this way, we're now rowing together, like in the same direction, which is critically important too. And not even just a startup, but I think also big companies as well. But instead of rowing in two directions, there's like 10 directions where people are rowing in different directions. And so, looking forward over the next 1-2 years, what's in store for Mirvie?
A lot of exciting things. So I think we are a very mission-driven company. So I think that's really one of the things that binds us together. And I think generally, if companies can find that mission that really unites everybody, that's awesome. Because I think that's like you say, a North Star or a longer-term direction that everybody's very unified. And so if you have to make sacrifices in the short term, it's understood that it's not personal, and it's not because the project is not worthy. It's just not above the cutoff rate. So that's, I think, one of the focus areas. But for the next 1 or 2 years, we want to get complete our trial, and that's a big area to make sure that we are really thoroughly validating our test. I think that's one thing that has hurt the industry. We all know the famous examples, but I think it also happens more broadly, where it's not fraud, but I think the data are weak, and I think that really just companies get really, I think, into getting to market very quickly, but maybe with a more limited data set. But then the price you pay when you commercialize is quite heavy. It might feel like you get to market fast, but the scaling is very slow because there's just these questions about the data, and that just come up at every conversation when you're trying to sell your product. And so I think even though it's not easy, we've tried to take the approach and say, okay, we're going to do very rigorous studies, but the data is then so clear and compelling that it makes your life much easier when you commercialize. So that's one of the things that we are very focused on. I think obviously then getting women access to this test, so they can finally have a way to really have a window into what's to come in the pregnancy, and then use that to, I think, take some actions. We have a kind of paradigm, we call it know, act, prevent, and it really flows in that order. If you don't know what is to come, then you can't act, and then you can't possibly prevent something more challenging from happening. So it really does have that flow. But I think what we really hope in the next 2 years is to start to change this mindset, which has been much more of a wait and see. Everything will be good, wait and see. And if symptoms develop or something bad happens, then we deal with it. And often it's a crisis management type of situation. So that current mindset, we hope to start shifting that to a more proactive and preventive mindset. It's like, hey, let me not assume it'll be perfect, because even though 4 out of 5 times things look good, 1 out of 5 times it can end up in a crisis. And do you want to take those odds with something so important in their life? I wouldn't, right? So I think that's really the idea, is hopefully we can start to shift to say, hey, we do want to know how this is going to evolve, and then try to take some preventive action. And eventually, I think, to hopefully have many more healthier moms and babies. And I think just make the whole experience of pregnancy and pregnancy health just more dignified and more kind of transparent and more knowledge driven, versus a hope for the best type of experience that often is the case.
Absolutely. And honestly, that's a world that I would like to live in, where it's not just a wait and see, because honestly, that's terrifying, like absolutely terrifying. And there are very close friends of mine who are embarking on this journey, and it is this learning everything through this conversation, learning about everything that kind of like a mother might have to consider. That is not that is not something that I want to wait and see on. I would very much want to get ahead of it. And I'm on Team Mirvie here when it comes to changing that mindset. And again, thank you so much for your time. And you've been very generous. And in kind of traditional, closing of, the Biotech Starters podcast, I'd like to close things out with 2 kind of closing questions. And the first would be, if you were to give any shout out to anyone who supported you, or would you like to give any shout outs to anyone that supported you throughout your career?
Yeah, I mean, there are many, really. I think it's really hard to pick, but I think what I'd say is there are a few key transitions in my career, which I think others experience as well. One was really just sort of in college, right? Having a mentor who gave me a chance to do research and kind of, like maybe you'll screw up stuff in the lab, but you'll learn a lot, and this will open up things for you. So that was amazing to have that opportunity, I think, in college. Then I think when we talk about at the Genome Center, switching fields from physical sciences to life sciences, Ron Davis was amazing, right? He was like, yeah, I know you know nothing about this, but I think you're fundamentally curious and capable and can make a difference. So come in and give it your best shot. And that was amazing, I think, example of trust that I will always carry with me. And then I think finally at Affymetrix was an amazing experience. I worked closely with the commercial leader there, Greg Fergus, and I think just learned so much about how you think about commercializing, which is often a different mindset than innovation. It's not opposed to it, but I think there's different set of considerations. And I think just, again, having that opportunity with Ion Torrent to go from scratch to a really high growth in the space of a few years was just an amazing experience. So I think these moments in your career where you take a risk on doing something new is not necessarily your area of expertise, but it's a great area of interest, and you have great willingness to learn from others. And then somebody gives you a chance to do that. Those are really amazing moments. And I think you grow so much as a result of that, taking that risk and then having some support on the other end to kind of, guide you a little bit along the way.
I look back on, my less storied journey, but the kind of the folks that kind of those really like these big inflection points. It's like exactly what you said too about like wanting to live in an era where the wind is behind your back and the future, the Cambrian explosion of innovation is taking place. But that's like one part of it, is like catching that wave, if I'm using a surfing analogy, catching that wave, but also having a team or a mentor or someone who's there to take that early bet and like say and bet on you. Like when you have the wind behind your back, there's a big wave, like a Mavericks level wave that you're about to catch on your surfboard, and someone there who's about to kind of shepherd you through it and give you a shot. That I think that's, truly a recipe for success. And my last closing question, if you can give advice to your 21-year-old self, what would it be?
Yeah, I think it's a great question to always think about, and I wish I'd taken some of this advice on earlier myself. But I think what I realize now is my success and my team's success is identical, right? There's no daylight that separates it. We're one and the same, and so really people say a lot about that, but I think really just feeling that in your heart is so important. And that's one advice I'd give to my 21-year-old, where I was hard charging, doing all this stuff that I wanted to do, but just knowing that is only in the context of a team that really makes sense and is so much more meaningful. That's one I think really important learning. And the other piece, I think, which I sometimes tell my kids, but Maya Angelou famously said, people won't remember what you told them, but they'll remember how you made them feel. I definitely give myself that advice at 21 because it's something that goes a long way. Along with, we live in a world which is so content and intellectually driven and knowledge driven that sometimes we forget that softer side or don't emphasize that enough. And I think there's a way to balance the two. And then together it comes to the same place. I think if people love working together, then you're going to do great things together, right? I think talent is assumed. But then if you bring in this empathy and love and teamwork and kind of feeling great about what you're doing together, it's going to go good places. That's just really a key learning.
I couldn't agree more. Honestly, we're all at the end of the day, we're all human, and we're not robots. With the AI overlords coming in, they're the robots. We're still humans here, and I think it's always good to remember that at the end of the day, like if you work with a good team that you're working towards a mission and a team that you enjoy working with, and you guys are all aligned, good things are to come. Well, Maneesh, thank you again for taking the time to jump on the podcast. I really appreciate it. And I, if I had my own way, I'd keep going down rabbit holes with you, but I realized you have, you're a busy person and you got other things to do. So, but thank you again. I'd love to have you come back in the future to double click on any concepts, because I know the listeners here are going to find incredible value from your journey and your story. But yeah, Maneesh, thanks again.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity. And I also thank you for doing this podcast, because I think there are so many who are wanting to go down this journey. And I think podcasts like this can give some inspiration, some measure of inspiration, and that's sometimes all you need.
Yep. Absolutely.
It.
Yep. Thanks.
That's all for today's episode of the Biotech Startups podcast. We hope you enjoyed our 3-part series with Maneesh Jain. Be sure to tune into our next series where we chat with Sandy Page, co-managing director of the Seabright Ventures Fund, which invests in the US middle market with a focus on life sciences and clean tech. Sandy is an expert CEO, having acquired and scaled Explorer Biolabs before their acquisition by Charles River. His extensive experience as a director at the Jackson Laboratory also offers a unique perspective that is invaluable for founders growing their business. The Biotech Startups podcast is brought to you by Exceeder. Don't want to miss an episode? Make sure to search for Biotech Startups Podcast in Apple Podcasts, Spotify and Google Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts, and click subscribe. To learn more about our leasing program, visit our website, www.excedr.com. We provide research labs with equipment leases on founder-friendly terms to support a path to exceptional outcomes. On behalf of the team here at Exceeder, thanks for listening.